Hello and welcome to the second video in this series where we'll look at slide design and how you can avoid the pitfalls. First a question, what's wrong with this picture? This is a slide background that could be used by someone very silly. There's some text on the slide, but the very distracting background makes it hard to read. I hope you'll agree this is very much better. More boring but better because we can actually read the text. So what about this background? Do you think it's good or bad? If so, what makes it good or bad? Pause the video for a moment while you think about this. The problem with graded backgrounds is that they are much harder. It is much harder to choose a font colour that will be visible in all parts of the slide. Yellow is quite good against a dark background, but is much less visible against a light background at the bottom of the slide, so you should probably avoid graded backgrounds. I suggest these are better. The main reason is they have a high contrast between the text and the plain, colour ungraded background. This makes for good clarity and readability. You might also want to think about colour saturation. Bright saturated colours such as those at the top right may be distracting or make the text hard to read. Pastel backgrounds or white are much less distracting. Clarity. And this is probably the most important take-home lesson from this presentation. Keep slides clear and simple. Don't lose what you want to say in over-elaborate slide design or other things that detract from clarity. Remember, the audience has to both listen to you speaking and read the information on the slide at the same time. Here are a number of examples from the web of not great slide design. Again, you should think about why they are not optimum slide design. I wouldn't normally quote from the Daily Mail, but this slide is priceless. What it's doing is attempting to describe US military strategy in Afghanistan. Brigadier General H.R. McMaster is quoted as making a very good point that some problems in the world are not bulletizable, and this is an example. An attempt to explain this issue using a PowerPoint slide is clearly going to fail. Here's another complicated picture. This is part of a metabolic pathway diagram, and you maybe think that looks at least as complicated as the military plan. Actually, it's much more complicated, but also rather better understood and rather more successfully applied. We wouldn't use this as a slide in a lecture to discuss metabolism, except to point to its complexity. So here's another take-home message. Presentations are good for many communication needs, but by no means all of them. There's a wide range of fonts available in Office and PowerPoint in particular, and many effects that can be applied to them. And they have their uses, no doubt, but not for presentations or other academic writing. Arial and Times are best. There is good evidence from cognitive psychology that fonts like Arial and Times are most readable. This is probably because they have good legibility. That is, the individual letters are easy to tell apart. These two examples are both in 20 point. Note that Times is slightly smaller than Arial. They're also very familiar, which helps. Newspapers almost always use Times or Arial or close variants. Books are usually published in a Times type font. Publishers of books, newspapers and magazines know their business and understand which fonts are the most readable, so stick to them. Choice of font size is the next issue. This is linked to how much information you want to put on a slide. For now, I would suggest a font size between 24 and 32 points is a good idea. Slide design. One topic per slide, maximum, etc., etc. Maximum 4 to 5 items per slide. Unless there's more, the slides are not for you. Here are some other examples from my lectures. Often you will need more than one slide to cover a topic, and that's fine. Just make sure the heading makes this clear. You should avoid having more than one topic in a single slide. This can be confusing to you, to the audience, and also maybe to you as well. Spelling and grammar. You should always have the spelling checker turned on and set to UK English. The language settings can be found in the review tab as shown here, and you should always think about grammar as well. The software will usually find misspelled words, such as those that is underlined in red here. However, if it hasn't flagged right, RITE, as being a mistake. That's because it's a grammatical error. The word is spelled correctly, we just use the wrong spelling of right. should have used RIGHT. This applies to all written work, of course. Read your work carefully, and if you can get someone else to read it for you, that's great. They'll often spot errors you have missed. It is very difficult to proofread your own work for this sort of problem. A final point on spelling. The spell checker is normally set not to check words are in all capitals. This is presumably due to the large number of acronyms, when we would of course want acronyms, I beg your pardon. We would of course always want to spell DNA or NADH correctly, whether in capitals or not. Check the settings yourself to avoid this problem, or at least carefully make sure anything in all capitals is spelled correctly. Up to 8% of men have some form of colour blindness and around 1% of women. Red-green colour blindness is the most common form. Its formal name is deuteranopia. People with this condition mix up any colours that contain some red or green component. This means they will often confuse blue and purple because they can't see the red component of the colour purple. In this example, the pink and purple pens use their red component from the point of view of a person with deuteranopia. Scan this QR code and I'll link to the web page for a number of simulations on colour blindness and some good general information on the topic. And there are many good sources both on the web and in print offering advice on how to design to avoid causing problems to people with colour blindness issues. One common piece of advice is not to use red or green, but they can be used if you think carefully about their use. You don't want to contrast red, yellow and green. Part of your audience may not be able to tell them apart. Sometimes you may want to emphasise a word or phrase, and colour is often used. If you use red or green in isolation, they may not pop out as much as you hoped. As ever, what we're trying to achieve here is high contrast reading the clarity, and the general advice discussed earlier still stands. Which brings us to the role of emphasis in slide design. The point of emphasis is not to do too much of it. Otherwise it becomes general noise and you fail to emphasise the point you want. Underlining, changing colour, or maybe using bold or italic is enough on their own. There's no real point in mixing them up. You probably should bear in mind that italics may be hard to see depending on how good the presentation system is. It is possible to make text flash. Please do not do this. This is very distracting and will cost you marks. As noted earlier, Microsoft programs allow lots of fancy text effects. They should be avoided as they usually undermine clarity. All text is actually harder to read than normal formatting, so again it's probably a good idea to avoid that. Also avoid grammatically silly things like multiple exclamation marks. One is enough. There is a good argument the emphasis should come from your words, and all exclamation marks are in fact superfluous. Images can be very helpful, but only if they're used in a directly relevant way to help making a key point. We've seen the slide before, and the purpose of the rabbit and the hot dog remain obscure to me. Cute images should be avoided unless your presentation is on something like the relative cuteness of kittens and puppies. In this case you would better have some evidence. So has anything in this slide been distracting you from what I'm saying? I'll bet there has been. Animated graphics are distracting and often annoying for the audience. They should usually, in fact almost always, be avoided. PowerPoint allows many transitions between slides. These are unnecessary and should be avoided. Similarly, it is a bad idea to have sound effects between slides. You will rapidly get your audience's back up if you have strange noises between slides. Zapping, probably not a good idea. Okay, you're an audience member and you have a couple of minutes to take this slide in while also listening to the speaker. How do you think you would do? Because I'm already moving on. I'm moving on to something which is much more comprehensible, a table or a graph. Generally speaking, when you have relatively large amounts of data to present, charts are the best option. So what if you only have a small amount of information? Should you use a graph? In this example there are 2 data points. It's quite hard to see what their values are, and perhaps using 2 data points isn't really justified. You could have done this as a pie chart, but that actually looks even worse, even though this does include the values. There are also a couple of other issues with this pie chart. Can you spot them? Now, the pie chart on the previous slide didn't have a graph title or any information on what was being measured. Make sure you always include relevant details. Here the data is possibly better presented as a simple table. You can read quickly while the presenter discusses the results. The statistical information included here is probably not something you want to talk about during the presentation, which is why it's been placed in a smaller font size. It's just demonstrating that you've done proper statistical analysis on these results. This is beyond the scope of this series on presentation basics, but my students should be aware we'll expect them to do more than just static presentations, especially when discussing large data sets. Presenting data dynamically can be great data understanding. If you're interested, see this video playlist about using the Tableau public data visualization tool, an excellent and free tool. Okay, to finish the video, I want to say some of our key slides, starting with the title slide. You should always have a title slide which includes your name or names if it is a group presentation, the name of the module and the title of the presentation. So this is a group presentation done by the product development team as part of the final year functional food module. The second to last slide will probably be your list of references. Notice that the font size is very much smaller than usual, and the audience wouldn't be expected to read them as you're talking about them. In fact, you wouldn't say much about the references. For a large project like the final year research project, you will probably only include the most important ones anyway. But you do need this slide. In a question and answer session, staff may want you to ask slides about staff may want to ask you questions about the references you've used. One mistake students make is to go too quickly over this slide. Take a few seconds to explain that these are your references, and if there are samples, say so and explain that the full set is in your written report. Something like this should be your final slide. It's a good idea to let the audience know you're finished talking. Very occasionally we have students who've just stopped talking and it isn't really clear the presentation is over, so let us know. And saying thank you and asking for any questions is a good idea. So here's some work for you to do. Create your own standard presentation. There are many options available in the File New menu of PowerPoint, or you might want to start your own design from scratch. Include these slides: a title slide, a content slide, 2 or 3 slides for the information you want to present. There's no need to actually include any information here, and a thank you slide. My students will be doing this for real, of course, and their draft presentations will be reviewed in a workshop session. You might want to go back and count the number of bullet points used in this presentation. It isn't many. I could do that here, but this presentation is mostly about graphics, so it lends itself to a bullet limited approach. Some people will tell you that bullet points are evil and should be avoided at all costs. There is something in this. For example, not using bullet points means that you can't just read off the slide, so it helps you present yourself as a better presenter. However, some bullet points are often the best way of getting across what you want to say. So use them, but don't overuse them. Okay, thanks for listening. In the final video in this series, we'll talk about making sure the big day goes well for you. Thanks for listening.